In terms of what success is defined by for Cambridge, for both like myself as an individual and for Cambridge as like a community, is that people will say, oh, because I cross paths with Tyger, or because I was part of Cambridge, I in some ways derive some value. If every single person that like kind of touches me or touches the ecosystem says that, then I think like success is in inevitability. All right, Dom. Thanks for joining for this conversation. I was telling you before we started recording that I thought this was going to be an especially fun one, just because it's only been 3.5, 4 months since I came to Korea, and like the whole Cambridge stuff was just an idea that I had in the back of my mind, and I have to go back and listen to our initial conversation that I had like during week 1 or week 2 here, because it was such like a different world that I was in then versus now. So I appreciate you doing this kind of end of year review with me. And I feel like it's very special, the relationship that we share, just because we've been having these types of chats for many years now. And so it's cool to kind of bring you along vicariously as well.
Anytime, and I'm particularly excited to ask most of the questions rather than answer them. So let's get into it.
Sounds great, man. Let's do it.
Cool. We were going to cover the last 3 or 4 months in detail, because I think that's kind of where all the juicy details will lie. But I really want to do, given that we're at the end of 2024 or nearly, kind of do like a full year's reflection to begin with and set the scene for people who might not know. Like on January the 1st, 2024, where were you? What were you doing? What was your mindset? Had you planned that you would be in Korea by the end of the year? And kind of like, where are you now? If we take those two bookends, and then we can contrast them, and then we can kind of fit in the middle bit from there.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of crazy how much can change in 12 months, especially because even when you ask me that question, I really need to go deep in my own backlog to understand where I was a year ago. I was working kind of full-time job at, it was an insurance company that was going through this whole private equity turnaround. And it wasn't until like August of this past year that I'd end up leaving. And so even that thought of leaving and moving to Korea, it was very high level, like none of the nuts and bolts. I don't even think I had any detailed discussions with some of my colleagues at my old job about that. So to see what has materialized is quite wild. In terms of like where I'm at now, Cambridge, what I had shared with you when I first came here and thought, hey, this could be an idea that's interesting to build out almost a digital ecosystem for people of Korean heritage, specifically those that are like entrepreneurs, investors, young working professionals. That has materialized. I held a launch event this past Thursday, and there's a lot of energy and momentum going into 2024 or 2025. But yeah, it's been a complete, 180. I couldn't have imagined even being in this seat, January of 2024.
Yeah, life moves quickly. So I guess January the 1st, the beginning of this year, had you mentally committed that you were going to leave the private equity job, or the job in the insurance company, but you hadn't spoken to people, or were you still kind of formulating in your mind whether that was the right thing to do? You were harboring ambitions to do your own thing, but you weren't quite sure whether you were ready for it yet. Where, like, mindset wise, where were you?
I was probably like 75 to 80% committed to making a move. At the very least, just taking a couple of months away from the job, even if I didn't move to Korea. At least if I recollect correctly, that's kind of where I was at. And I might have had 1 or 2 conversations with like my direct bosses about, hey, this idea is something that I'm thinking about from a career development perspective. I just felt like I owed myself some time to think and explore. And so I was actively like saving a bit of financial runway to make this possible. But it really wasn't until I would say like June, July timeframe when I had more of those like very real discussions about departing, and then had like a very clear game plan of, all right, I'm going to move to Korea, spend a few months there and see how it is. So it was, the plans were not concrete by any measure.
And what was the reason sort of nagging at you that you needed to leave, or you felt this kind of burning desire to do some thinking and try your own thing?
There were Probably a handful of reasons. I mean, the fact that I have an older brother and older sister, and they are kind of same age range as me, just a couple years older, and both of them got married recently. Both of them have kids, and seeing that their life change, it was kind of a wake up call of there are certain risks that I can take right now with the position that I'm in. And the fact that relationally, like the obligations that I have are relatively limited than, 5 years, 10 years from now, most likely. And so that was kind of pressing on me. And the whole Korea move was something that I had been curious about since I was in college because I had done 2 abroad kind of internships in Tokyo, Japan, and had always thought like those 2 experiences were deeply formative in terms of expanding my mind and my worldview. And if I had the opportunity to have worked in Korea just because of my own heritage, that would have been, I think, really cool and rewarding. I was a little bit cautious about it just because you always have these kind of fantastical ideas about what it might be like doing that, but you never know until you actually make the move. So it was just an idea in the back of my head that I thought it would be cool. And then the other thing I'd say is in terms of the passion projects that I was working on. You and I having recorded conversations and me having had many podcast discussions with other people, and then slowly over time, kind of a digital community just naturally cropping up around my core group of friends, specifically around like intellectual topics and ideas. They were all like digital first for the most part. And that gave me more conviction that even if I did make a move, I wasn't like completely upending my life, and that I would have a bunch of other people kind of supporting me in the background. And I just saw so much progress. It was incremental progress, but I saw progress there. And I thought this is probably worth just investing more time and energy into exploring and just see what happens. And worst case scenario is, 3 or 4 months later, I realize, all right, I should probably go back to kind of a normal job situation. And I could always find through my network and through my resume and things like that, new opportunities, professional opportunities. And so that's kind of what was going through my mind from a risk analysis perspective, I guess I could say.
And it's funny to think, all the things that you just mentioned about kind of digital community, how that has actually kind of coalesced into Cambridge, which we'll come on to. But the actual decision to go, and I'm going to paraphrase Joseph Campbell, where he says something like, take the leap, it's not as wide as you think. And the question being, as you're going through the process of like, I'm actually going to leave my job, I'm going to take the ultimate pay cut, go straight down to zero, and try this thing for a period of time, can feel at various points like incredibly scary. And that transition in hindsight, what has it felt like? Has it felt bigger or smaller than you thought at various points heading into it?
On a week-by-week basis, I think, like with any kind of founder or entrepreneur starting their own thing, there are certain weeks where it's like you see so much opportunity and you feel the momentum and you feel the energy. And then there are other weeks where it just doesn't feel like anything is moving forward, and you wonder about what's actually possible and feasible and why somebody else hasn't done something like this before. So on a week-by-week basis, it has its ups and downs, but I would say overall, one of the most reassuring things that I have found was even on like day 2 or day 3 of coming to Korea, I had felt quite comfortable. I think that if I had made the right decision and something just felt off, that I would have noticed that pretty quickly. And with the people that I started to meet over time and the connections that I was building and people's receptivity to Cambridge and the idea, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I would say the first month, it was a slow adjustment process, even though I felt comfortable and felt like this is the place that I should be. I wasn't really making that much progress on like building out Cambridge and articulating what it was. But once I got into, the second month, the third month, like now I could feel kind of the cascading effect of all the relationships that I have built up and like a deep demand for the thing that I am building. At least that's what I'm telling myself right now. Maybe 2025 will expose some other realities that are kind of counter to that. But it is very interesting, like especially with the Joseph Campbell stuff. I think everybody's, especially with these types of big leap decisions, everybody's experience is very different. The one thing I will say is, I couldn't really articulate why to other people who were asking me here in Korea, like why exactly I wanted to make this move, because I don't speak any Korean. It's not like I had family here. I didn't have a specific job or project that I was actively working on that was like mature. And so it was really puzzling to a lot of people. And nevertheless, I felt a pull, and I felt, that I should try this. And I thought that in the future, I would regret not making a move like this. And so, you can call it, supernatural powers, the universe, God, whatever. But it really, like, I haven't felt something like that before. And then coming here and reflecting on the past 3 months, that has been probably the most revelatory in terms of from an experience perspective. There's no way I could have gotten something like this had I not made the move.
So interesting, the whole kind of energy discussion. I do think it's real. I kind of felt it in various parts before as well, and you do have to listen to your body and how it responds to decisions you make. I'd be curious to know whether moving to a completely different time zone, 12, 13-hour flight away, whether you think that made it easier or harder to do what you're doing now.
I think it certainly made it a lot easier. Originally, especially with K-Bridge, the idea was the Korean diaspora is massive, and connecting people in a digital ecosystem is really the service that I'm providing. And I think that still remains true. But the fact that I'm here in Seoul and I am a really English only, Korean American, and I'm in contact with all of these other people that they don't necessarily have the same background as me, but they feel like they're caught between two different cultures of not fitting into like Korean society, and also being exposed to Western values and cultures as well. There's a lot more people here with that background than I had first expected there to be. And so the fact that I find one or two people in Seoul that have that profile, and they're like, hey, this person is building a community, and they just tell their friends through word of mouth. There's no way I could have tapped into that understanding and that kind of community building dynamic had I been doing that in Chicago or New York or San Francisco. At least that's my belief right now. Is it was really critical to be doing it here. And I will say, in terms of distractions as well, it's I love my family, and I wish that I could spend more time with them, and it's difficult to do that when I'm here in Korea. But the fact that I have like zero like real obligations, and I'm able to just invest my full time and energy into thinking, how am I going to build this out? I can't understate how important that has been, and the fact that Korea is a very 24/7 culture, and there's high-speed internet like everywhere, and I can just be working in cafes like late at night. That has made it so easy to continue to do that. And cost of living wise, U.S. compared to Korea, it just made so much sense to extend my runway for as long as possible and do that here in Seoul. So on so many levels, I think it's been beneficial to make the move.
If you're a voracious consumer of content, you listen to more podcasts than most people I know, and you've read a ton of books in the last few years. Which of those would you point to as being kind of most formative in the transition period in particular? I think a lot of people are thinking about have thought or have done something similar to what you're doing, where they're in a more traditional job and they think, I actually want to do something completely different, but I don't know how to go about it. I'm scared about it, etc., etc. Were there any resources that you'd point to and say, actually, reading that, listening to that, watching that really helped me either make the transition or make the decision?
There is and I actually read this after I had made the move, but one of my Twitter friends, Alexander, I've never met him before, but we've had a couple conversations just over video call, and after I had made the move, he had sent me it was basically an extended essay, and the title was Quit Your Job, and it was written by Palladium magazine. I don't know who the author was of Palladium, but he was kind of explaining how dangerous it is to get caught up in the receiving a monthly salary that is keeping you afloat, and it keeps you comfortable, but you're not doing the thing that you feel like is your life's work, or something that's meaningful and is contributing it to society, right? And how over time that can like slowly kill a person's soul, effectively. And reading that, it like resonated more than anything that I had ever read before, and I just shared it with like all my friends because it's very interesting. A lot of the people that are interested in Cambridge, they are working for companies. Some of them are Korean, some of them are startups, but they don't feel like it's their right fit. And they're trying to figure out, like, how do I navigate my life moving forward, because they realize that life is short. And so I've sent this to like a bunch of people. I don't know if I've sent it to you, Dom, yet, but I need to, because it was super impactful. So that was that was probably the key resource, I would say. And then as it relates to like Cambridge and what has affected my thinking a lot, there were two books that I had read, one while I was here and one right before. Alvin Toffler's book, Future Shock. He wrote this in like 1970. He was kind of describing the world that we are moving to, and how in a world of exponential change, we need new kind of societal structures that help people digest change, and help communities and help governments digest change at a faster and faster rate. So that one was really influential in me building out Cambridge. And then the other obvious one was Balaji Srinivasan's Network State book. And when I had found Quang Do, who was working on overseas Vietnamese, which is kind of like a Vietnamese version of Cambridge, not exactly the same, but I had found Quang, had read The Network State, and those two books were very influential in my ambitions with Cambridge.
Super interesting. I haven't read Quit Your Job, so I'll go and find that after this. And then Colossus, watch out. The next question is going to be about Cambridge, but before that one, I want you to explain. You made a very bold decision. You made a few bold decisions this year, one of which moving to Korea, but also changing your name from Tyler to Tyger. Explain kind of the background to that decision. I know you wrote about it, but for the purpose of the podcast, explain it. And why it felt like you had to do it, or why it was helpful to you to change your name.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a similar situation with the why did you move to Korea dynamic as well, in terms of the best response I could give is the idea emerged, right? And there's always a question of like, where do ideas come from in the first place, right? Like, why do people have these new interesting ideas to do something radical? Like, why even have the idea to move to Korea? You know, like, why not just stay in the US? There's so much opportunity there. And I had a good background and a good career track. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly why. The rationale that I gave in terms of why I changed my name and the context there is when I was young, my dad had nicknamed me Tyger because I was a very competitive person, like even with my siblings. And I also was a very like physically active individual. And when I was writing like a recent essay before I had moved to Korea, I was kind of thinking about like how much my life has changed, but at the same time, how much some like core underlying pieces of my identity remained the same. And it reminded me of how my dad used to nickname me Tyger, and a lot of the reasons why he nicknamed me that are still true today, even though I'm doing things that I never could have imagined, like having a podcast conversation and moving to a foreign country and all of that stuff, you know? And so it felt right that I was making a big step in terms of a life change, moving to Korea, and that using a name change as an opportunity to kind of like redefine myself would be a helpful thing to do. So those were kind of the factors that went into it. But again, it just felt right. And I will say it has been kind of advantageous in a very pragmatic way where, Koreans, the L letter is very hard for them to pronounce. And so when they try and pronounce Tyler, it doesn't sound right exactly. And so what they end up doing is, if they're calling me Tyger, it's a lot easier for them to pronounce. So there's been a practical benefit as well.
Did you know that at all before doing it?
I mean, I did know the fact that L sounds were difficult for them to pronounce, but I didn't make the decision, thinking that there would be a practical benefit there.
Yeah. Okay. How much better, or I guess, have you gotten better at kind of tuning into that sort of start, you reference how you had a thought came to you about changing your name, and then actually you went and did it. Similar sort of process in some ways to making the transition in the first place. Do you feel like you can train that muscle, or like just listening to yourself a bit deeper? Is that something that comes from spending more time kind of dictating your own life and time, or are they kind of like somewhat random, but you actually have the time to act on those feelings?
Usually what will happen is some idea will emerge, and it's not exactly clear where that idea is coming from, or some feeling will kind of bubble up inside of me. And most of the time, I'll just like kind of do a clock of like, okay, that thing is there, and it's just kind of sitting there. And I'll just like let it sit for a while. Maybe it's a couple days, maybe it's a couple of weeks. But if it just keeps like, rising to the surface of like my thought process, then I feel like I need to act on it in some way. Right. And I think that's what happened with both of those. Like the Korea stuff, like even taking a break from my job, that had been something that I'd thought about for, years, probably like 2 or 3 years, I would say. And the name change stuff was something that first came to mind like 6 months or so before I think I decided to make the move to Korea. And then as the move approached, it just felt like, okay, this is the right time to do it. So that's usually how it happens, is the idea kind of comes up. It sounds crazy at first, and it's just sitting there in the back of my mind. I think even with the gym streak was the same thing. Is one of the things that I was thinking about was like, there's so much friction in kind of just putting yourself out there, right? What is something that I could do that would make this easier? And if I could just be willing to post something on Instagram every day and get 0 likes and 0 attention, but I grow that muscle of just putting stuff out there, I think that would be advantageous for myself, right? And so it just kept nagging me of like, okay, this is probably a practice I should start, and then it emerged. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Is it a muscle that you can start to move and develop? But on numerous occasions, especially with the meaningful things that have happened in my life, that's it's things have happened and transpired, and it's been really cool to see.
On the gym streak, you just reminded me, and I have to ask now. You've just passed 1,000 days of going to the gym or doing some form of physical exercise and sharing it every single day for over 1,000 days, which is worth pausing on how incredible that achievement is. But what are the main lessons that have come from that? As you said before, if I can do this thing where I might not get any engagement, but I'm doing it on a consistent basis, surely good things will come from it. Like, what have been the derivative effects of doing? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you're fitter 1,000 days in, but like kind of things that you wouldn't have expected to happen. What have those things been?
When it comes to longevity and just how hard it is, the whole Munger says the most important part of compounding is to never interrupt it. And it always sounds so simple, and everybody knows that consistency is important. But whenever you try and do anything very, very basic for extended periods of time without interruption, you just realize how hard it is. And it also taught me the importance of being flexible and the importance of kind of ritual as well. Some people ask me like what I do when I'm sick, or what I do when I'm injured, or when I'm having a really hard day, or when things just go crazy, family situation and stuff like that. And the reality is, not every single one of my workouts is a 2-hour long gruesome workout. Sometimes I know I need to make the effort to get into the gym. I'll do 10 push-ups, and that will be my gym streak. And some people might look at that and be like, that's not a real gym streak then. But to me, it's just the conscious, it's almost like a symbolic representation of, okay, here is my tithe for the day, of like I put in the work and I made the conscious practice. And then the other thing is, just in terms of habits and how powerful they are as well, is the fact that I don't have to wake up every day and ask myself a question, am I going to go to the gym today or not? I wish I could do this with more parts of my life, because the gym streak stuff is just automatic at this point. It's a given that I'm going to the gym and I never have to make that decision. But if I could do that more with reading and writing and other practices, that would be awesome. But again, from the sustainability perspective, it's just so tricky. The last thing that I actually haven't talked about as it relates to the gym streak is recording myself, there was a bit of like vanity that comes with it, of like you feel maybe prideful or arrogant if you're like just posting stuff of your workouts every day, you know. But the one benefit that I have realized is, especially with starting to climb over the past 12 months or so, you think that you know what your movements look like. You think you know what your actions look like. This is one of the benefits of podcasting as well. Yeah. But then when you go back and I can see like all the workouts that I've done, and it's not the reality of what that picture is showing me on the screen is not the same as I imagined it to be, you know? And so there's been a little bit of a humbling experience as well. And when it comes to just like athletic development, that it's been very powerful for me to kind of self-instruct myself of like, oh, I need to do this movement differently, or there's this move that I didn't see. And so just having a third person perspective has been a reminder of I need to do that in more aspects of my life, where I can just reflect on me from the third person point of view. That's been super powerful.
Yeah, Tim Ferriss was talking about this actually earlier this year on a podcast that we released, where he said early on he would tape his podcasts. He would get them all professionally transcribed, and then he would send them to people to say, critique my questions, you know. And like, it's the same thing where when you listen back to yourself, or you write down what you've said, and then you actually critique, you know, often you remember the good questions, or like the aha moments in a conversation, but there's 80% of the rest of what you said is less good. And so I would subscribe to what you just said. I'm curious whether it's made it easier when you're having a tough day with Cambridge or something else in your life, whether the reminder that you are now on day 1,000 and something of your gym streak, whether that makes the hardship in other areas of your life easier, because you're like, I know I have the capacity to be perseverant in tougher situations. And as you said, like, it's a very simple act going to the gym every single day. But when you string it together for that period of time, you take something easy and you make it really, really difficult. And I think you can't overstate how hard it is to do anything, literally anything, on a repeat basis for that long. But I am curious whether it makes it easier, or like when you're in a hard moment and you think, actually, I know I can do this because of the streak that I'm putting together in another area of my life.
Yes, and I guess there's two aspects to that, and one where I want to be a little bit careful, which is at some point this streak will break, right? I am going to get to a point where I get so injured that I literally can't get out of bed, or I get so sick, or maybe I just decide like, all right, the gym streak has served its purpose, and now it's time for me to invest my time and energy elsewhere while continuing to make a daily practice of working out without these like stringent, I'm going to record or post every single day, right? And so I don't want to just be identified as the gym streak person, and if that stops, then that identity is kind of shattered. You know, it's been beneficial to the extent that I have built up that identity, but I don't want to nest everything in the fact that I'm keeping some streak. So that's definitely, you know, one thing that I've been mindful of. The other piece is in terms of this transferability dynamic, right? Is for me, I do think that it has been a powerful asset in terms of if I do something else hard, knowing that I've done other hard things in other domains has become a huge asset. But I also think that there are some other people where it's so domain specific of like, wow, they are excellent and they are hardworking in this endeavor, and for some reason it's not transferring to other areas of their life. So I do think for me that it has transferred to other areas in my life. And I do think that there's something about the whole, David Goggins is probably the face of this, but the hardening of the mind, or just being willing to overcome adversity, is a very, you know, real thing, and a real way of thinking that you have to develop. And I think that doing physical activities, at least for me personally, is one of the best ways, maybe the only way that I feel like I can I can develop it. There's almost like and I actually haven't told other people this, but for the longest time when I'm working out, the kind of music that I listen to is like heavy metal or like hardcore rap, right? It's very aggressive. And that is kind of the mental dialogue oftentimes that is going through my brain when I'm exercising. And part of what I think about just like life in general more and more is that there are these different emotions or these kind of different vibes that the brain gives off, and you have to know where the appropriate time and place to like exercise that is. And for me, there's like an aggressive dynamic. Maybe it's like a very human primal thing of just like either moving weight or just like putting strain on your body. And for me, that environment is the best way to exert that energy. And I feel like if I don't have that outlet in the gym dynamic, then it's going to seep into maybe other areas of my life where I don't want it to seep into. So that's the other benefit of the gym streak for sure, is it serves so many great purposes.
Yeah, that resonates. Maybe not the heavy metal, but the fact of like needing to move and having outlets for other stuff. And I often think work, and particularly building a startup, which I promise about to get to, it can feel, as you said at the beginning, like really like a roller coaster. One day feels incredible, the next day you feel super flat because you don't think there's any traction or whatever it might be. You're trying to find product market fit, etc., etc. But like if you can make steady incremental progress in some area of your life, and fitness is just one of those things that is in your control, you can choose on any given day to go out for a run or go to the gym or whatever, and you can feel like you're getting fitter on an incremental basis. Like you actually feel in some area of your life like it's trending in the right direction, where this other thing that you're building, which is somewhat out of your control, like it will just, you just have to kind of ride the waves with it. But having something that you can focus on and say, today I'm going to get better in this aspect, like is just psychologically very helpful while you're going through something that's much more turbulent.
Yes, the whole even process of knowing that you have personal agency. I do think this is one of the main differentiators between, I guess, like maybe an American point of view versus like Korean culture is it's always very obvious to me that I have some degree of agency, and in all aspects of my life. When I'm having a conversation with somebody, when I get into some sort of like physical altercation, anything, it's like that is the default. And I realize that with a lot of people that I come into contact that have a much more Korean mindset, I would say, is the degree to which they have personal agency is not as, I don't want to say developed, but it's just a completely different perspective on how they approach problems and situations. As their instinct isn't to say like, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z and take these actions and produce these outcomes. It's usually a more of that is kind of the way things work, and I need to adapt to the existing structure. And I think that just pushing weight around, moving your body around, reminding yourself that you have, personal agency over your own physical being is a helpful, reminder of that.
100%. Okay, Cambridge. You kind of alluded to the vision a few times. I guess was there a moment in the past 3, 4, 5 months where you were like, this is the thing that I am going to build, and from that point, like, how has that vision changed, if it has changed at all, and if not, like, what is the vision today?
Originally I thought that the primary I guess like end user or individual who would find a community like this valuable would be somebody like myself that is living abroad, in the States, in Canada, in Australia, that have Korean heritage. And it still might end up being the case that a lot of those people are very attracted to what it is I'm building, because they were the first kind of people that I wanted to target. But what I've been surprised by is, as I have had conversations with people here in Korea, there's been a small segment of Koreans who speak English and have maybe spent a little bit of time abroad for like an internship or a study abroad program. And they have aspirations of doing something global, whether that's literally leaving the country, and for unfortunate reasons, just given what's been happening in South Korea on like numerous metrics of like well-being and societal well-being as well, or just like own personal interests of they're interested in American culture or working in Canada, something like that. And there have been a handful of those people that have taken interest in Cambridge, and I didn't have even a thought of bringing those people really into the fold. There are also some like foreigners that are just, they come to Korea because they're curious about the culture, or they find themselves here for some reason. They don't speak very good Korean, and they're looking for English speaking community, but they're still very passionate about like Korea and its future, and maybe want to make this their like long-term home. And so there have been a number of people like that I want to bring into the fold. So in terms of the broad structure of focusing on people in their 20s and their 30s that are creatives, founders, people a little bit more open-minded and looking to information share with each other, and that primarily being for people of Korean heritage that are around the world, that structure still is the same one that I'm running with. But there are other people that I couldn't have foreseen taking interest in this community. And then I will say, and this is a very recent development, is I held a launch event this past Thursday, and since that event, I've been reached out to by a number of kind of Korean diaspora type people living in Seoul that are 40s and up. And so it seems like there's a whole nother interest of different age cohorts taking interest in this as well, which is really exciting to see.
And so what does Cambridge look like today? What does the network, I guess, either of people, kind of the infrastructure around it, what does it entail?
In terms of the framework, there's a public and a private kind of face to Cambridge. The public is going to be open to anybody, and it'll be basic things like a podcast that I'm hosting, social media channels and social media groups that anybody could join and contribute to, and then a monthly newsletter that I've been writing for each month is going to be the goal. Kind of summarizing developments within Cambridge, different events that people are hosting, cool projects that people have launched, kind of as a way to showcase like the cool things that people within the Cambridge community are doing. And so that's kind of the open kind of side of things. And I think it's helpful because you do want to get some sort of distribution outside of the ecosystem as well. Yeah. I think that introduces a bit of novelty and opportunity for upside that's just unexpected. But then the private side of the community is going to be, and this is still in development, but to start 200, 300 kind of paying members that get access to the full directory list of who is in this fellowship program is what I'm calling it. They'll get access to kind of a private Slack with a bunch of kind of subcategories. And this is really for people who are looking to build deeper relationships with other people in the community. And ultimately, like, the filter is going to be, yes, if you have professional accomplishments and a developed career and a good track record, that is like a point in your favor. But ultimately, like, I'm trying to build a culture that is like a give first kind of culture, and people that are trying to play win-win games with each other, and not compete within set boundaries. That's a very difficult thing to do, but that is kind of what's been advantageous for me here in Seoul, is I can have conversations with people and I can get a sense for who they are and kind of what their mindset is. So that's kind of the two pieces right now, is the public open resources and then the private community. And the private community isn't really a thing yet. It's something that I'm going to be building over the next couple of weeks and then bringing people on in early 2025.
If you were to break up the last 3 or 4 months of building Cambridge into chapter headings, being kind of the most formative experiences to where you are now, like, what would you, I guess, how many of them are there, and like, what would you title those chapters in the evolution of the business that you're building?
That is a good question. If I were to do three kind of three chapters for each month, I would say the first one was discussions and learnings. Because at that point, I didn't even know if I should be here in Korea, and the Cambridge stuff was just like way high level,
Yeah.
And so at that point, I just wanted to see, are there English speaking communities that exist in Seoul? And are there digital ecosystems where people are hanging out and exchanging information? And so probably had somewhere between like 10 to 15 conversations month one, right? And I was getting mixed signals. It wasn't completely obvious to me that starting Cambridge would be something that's worthwhile. So that I'd say would be month one. And then month two, I would say is like deepening conviction, where I felt like I had a critical mass of people, and this was probably only like 20 to 25 people who said, yeah, this is something that I would be interested in if it existed. And even though I wasn't very concrete with the details around what exactly it was just kind of like a group of people online. They said like, yes, I'd be interested in this. So then I started building a web page out, and then I started the podcast, and I started interviewing some people, and more people started to take interest in it and connect me with their friends. So that's when I started to see in month two, like, okay, there is something here. I'm not just trying to manifest a company that is cool to me, but is not interesting to anybody else. And then in month three, it would have been like, the biggest thing that happened was this past Thursday, the in-person event that I held. And so that was like a Cambridge launch event. And I thought maybe there'd be 25 to 30 people. Over 60 people kind of joined, and the response after the fact was just overwhelming positivity. And that was probably the pinnacle of validation around, hey, there's like some serious demand here, and there's kind of a need that has existed for some time that nobody is serving. Still reasons why I don't entirely understand. And that's, that third chapter is probably the most exciting one for sure.
It's interesting that you're building a digital ecosystem, and the in-person event is the thing that was like feels the most catalytic, or whatever the word is.
Yes.
Like what is it there, like, or what was it from the event that kind of gave this energy both to the room and then that flowed through to after and follow-ups?
The hard thing, I think, with the digital community is to articulate exactly what it is, right? Because it is kind of ethereal. And I mean, the internet in general, somebody trying to explain the internet in the very early stages, it's like, what is this thing exactly? I think I tend to have the same issue explaining something like Bitcoin to people who are not tech savvy. Is like, yeah, there's these coins that exist, but they don't really exist. Like, I don't really get it,
Yeah, there's a white paper, you should read it.
Yes, exactly. And that was the challenge that I was having with the digital community dimension. I think the in-person dynamic was it was validation for the people that took interest in it, that it would manifest into something that felt more real.
Yeah.
And I think that there's also and for reasons I can't explain, there was a dearth of just like networking opportunities that don't feel like there's some professional angle to them, because there are a lot of events that happen in the startup ecosystem, or different conferences that are held by like government sponsored entities that people go to, and they'll listen to pitches and things like that. But it feels like the whole thing is set up for professional objectives, right? And there isn't something where it's just like, hey, these are just cool people, and most of the people are kind, and they're curious, they're working on other things. Maybe they're going through career transitions, and most of them are, in their 20s and 30s. There is no kind of end objective. It's just hang out, exchange ideas and information, and see what comes over time. And building that kind of a culture is something that I think we were successful in doing at the event, and that's why it had such an overwhelming response. Is it felt like something very different than anybody had really tasted it before.
And you mentioned that it had kind of led to a flurry of older people. I hesitate to use the words older people, but older people reaching out after, sort of taking interest in Cambridge. How did that manifest? Was that just people coming away from the event and talking to their colleagues, or was there like actually something specific going on there?
I think it's kind of a mixed dynamic. One is when you see a bunch of young people that are working on some interesting things. There's two, there are a lot of venture capital firms actually who on Luma, for example, I posted on the Seoul chapter on Luma, which is like an events hosting website, and people could just see what was going on and what the event was going to be about. And so there were some people that registered for the event that I could tell were like 40s and up, but they had a venture capital kind of background, and so they were looking at who maybe there are some young people that have interesting ideas. So I think that was one of the interests, but the other is there is also like people in their 20s, I think, are having the realization, especially in their late 20s, of, hey, am I building my career in a long-term direction that I want to continue developing, right? In my 30s and my 40s, all of that stuff. And I feel like I see that a lot with people in their late 20s and their early 30s. But at the same time, I think that that's happening for a large cohort in their 40s and their 50s as well. And they're looking for other people to have conversations around, hey, are there other collaboration opportunities or businesses that I could start with where I'm at in life right now? And I think there's quite a bit of that as well. So those are the two things. Yeah.
I feel like you've read most of the canonical startup texts that are out there. I'm curious how building your own startup relates to what you've read. There's always this interesting thing between the person that sits in their armchair all day reading everything versus the person who's actually like out there building something. How much crossover is there, or like which bits do you think are underappreciated and which bits are overemphasized from reading to putting into practice?
Yeah, this is I think that most of the founders that I come across, they just do too much thinking. Right. And maybe I should be a little bit careful because it's probably very domain dependent and industry dependent. But for me, in terms of what I'm doing and what I'm building, it's like the downside of taking risks is not very high. All right. It's like I can't really make that many catastrophic mistakes unless I stake my reputation on something and it goes terribly wrong. Right. And so for me, it's always been like, I'm going to keep the net as open and as wide as possible. I'm going to have as many conversations with people that I think could take interest in something like Cambridge. I'm going to record those conversations. I'm going to start posting about it. I'm going to start reaching out to people that are like community leaders to connect me with other people. Just like constantly taking action and then seeing which of those actions have the most fruit over like a multi-week period, and then adjusting the game plan. That's been something that I've been doing a lot more, and also trying to have conversations with people who have done something similar in the past is like a complete cheat code, right? Because I interviewed this guy, Quang Do, who was running overseas Vietnamese, and he ended up coming to Seoul. We were able to get coffee together. I kind of downloaded a lot of his approach and his thought process on what worked and what didn't work, and it was super helpful in like even just having seeing somebody do the thing that you want to do or that you think should exist, right? Just seeing that and knowing it's possible changes your whole perspective on things, and then porting over all of those insights is really good. One like very obvious example is I'd never been active on LinkedIn before. I've just recently started to become more active on it. And the amount of inbound that I have gotten through LinkedIn posts over the past few months has been kind of insane. And it's like one of those things where once you try it and you use it a little bit, you realize, man, I should have been doing this stuff a year or 2 years ago, you know? So I'm always trying to figure out like what's the next thing like that that's going to pop up.
I keep hearing this about LinkedIn. I need to join the bandwagon at some point. Well, what in terms of those kind of different forms of media, LinkedIn being one of them, the podcast being another, the newsletter a third. Like, which has LinkedIn kind of been the winner of those at this point, or how have you like assessed their efficacy? And how you might take those things into 2025. At some point, like there are limits to what you can do in a 24-hour period, and you have to focus your time in specific areas that you say are working. So I'm curious, as like taking into next year, what are you looking to double down on, and what might fall by the wayside for a period of time?
Yeah. Well, in terms of like the optimal way to build out a community, with some scale without sacrificing the underlying culture and the ethos that you're trying to build. I think the most effective way is actually with these in-person events, because what ended up happening is, a handful of these people who I met here, who I thought were like high quality people, ended up bringing their friends along. And their friends, I would say like 80 to 90% of them were like awesome people, and great fits for the community. And then instead of just looking at a LinkedIn profile or having to do a one-on-one kind of coffee chat with them to see what they're kind of all about, it was a much more efficient way for me to be like, okay, this community can scale with these in-person events. And then also during the event, something that I didn't realize was there were some people that started posting about the events, whether it was on Instagram or on LinkedIn. And so I didn't have to do posts about the event, which I ended up doing myself, but other people were talking about it and sharing about it. And I think it has to be valuable in the first place in order for people to start doing that. But it has been a very powerful mechanism to grow the community and make some noise in the digital ecosystem as well. And then people start, reaching out. There's probably 5 or 6 people since last Thursday that have reached out saying, hey, I heard about it from a LinkedIn post that my friend had posted about. So the events is something that I'm going to continue to lean into. And then documenting and recording some of the event content, and then posting it on LinkedIn and Instagram. I think those are the main mechanisms at this point. I'm going to try and experiment with some others as well. It's just so hard with finite time constraints of knowing what the optimal, approach is.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Well, one thing that's always fascinated me is the kind of the revenue model of all sorts of different business models. And as you kind of think through to next year, at some point, ideally, you talked about the private community here, that Cambridge starts making money, so you can survive. And how do you think about that? Because I think it's often so glossed over how opaque either the revenue model or the pricing of any business should be. And so often you just see companies put a finger in the air, comp against something that looks relatively similar, and then price it there. Mm-hmm. How do you think about that? How fixed are you in terms of what you think it should be? For example, could you see a world where actually these events become kind of the core of Cambridge and people pay to go to the event itself? Or actually, are you pretty set on it being this private community? Would love kind of your reflections on how you think about this, because I think it's such a key piece of building a business that often isn't really talked about. It's sort of talked about like there is a science, but I'm sure there isn't.
I should be clear that it's true that this is going to be a business that I'm going to be building, and I do want to see it have some financial success, largely because if it doesn't, then it means that I just can't work on it any longer. Yeah. And that really is the only thing, is I want to figure out how do I cover my living costs, right? There are way more opportunities for me to make money in bigger ways on a faster timeline if I wanted to, whether that would be like collaborating with venture capital firms, or partnering with large corporations to host some of these events, and then start hiring like events managers and social media kind of content people. But I think the reality is I am not chasing some multi-million-dollar success or any unicorn success. I really just want, it's like I feel like I figured out if I can live this life where I'm having conversations with interesting people, I still have time to be intellectually stimulated in other ways, whether that's listening to podcasts or reading books on my own schedule, and I can continue to work out every day. I mean, most people with jobs and families, they can't really do any of that, Yeah. And knowing that those are the things that I want to control for, I'm not going to sacrifice on trying to speed up the monetization pathway in order to get more people into the ecosystem or to do something on a grander financial scale. I feel like I really just need to find 300 to 400 people that kind of believe in me and what I'm building and this community, and pay 150, $200 per year to be a part of it. And everything else from there in terms of business opportunities, investing in people, hosting larger events, all of that stuff is an afterthought. And so that's really where my mind has been, and this is something that I've had to go back and forth on, because when I think about it, the idea of, building this massive company, is exciting, and you kind of want to test yourself on some dimensions, but it's also I don't want to get distracted by this is a money-making endeavor or something like that. I feel like those things have to come kind of in an organic process, and the one thing that I've seen and been really surprised by is even hosting this event, through a connection on very short notice, somebody just offered their space and said, hey, I think that the community that you're building is pretty cool. I'll just let you use the venue for free. And a friend that I had met here, who is a content creator, had said, hey, I really like the stuff that you're doing. I was considering leaving Seoul before you came and decided to start this community. I'll videotape, your presentation so that you could put it online, and I'll do it for free. Right. So I feel like, especially with this community dynamic, is I have to retain the culture at all costs, and people will deliver value, will invest in it if it retains the ethos that I'm trying to build. And so that's more important to me at this point than anything else in terms of business models and stuff like that. It does cross my mind, and I do need to make a living doing it. But anything beyond that is mostly an afterthought.
Fascinating. It kind of leads me into another question about just culturally the differences between Korea and the US, where the standard metric of success in the US is kind of in dollar terms. How big is your business? How quickly is it growing? Etc. And you and I have had really interesting discussions about just the dynamic of living in a lower cost society, allows you more runway to be able to build the thing that you love and want to build, but also how people view their lives and their careers in Korea relative to the US, and kind of where you fall now, having been there for a few months in the society, how you kind of perceive your life ambitions, and whether there's stuff you've taken from Korea and things that you're trying to instill in Koreans from the US. I'd love for you to riff on kind of the cultural differences and how you see it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think that just from a high level perspective, in terms of why K-Bridge has worked and why there's been so much intrigue in it, is because there are people that I think deep down kind of want to redefine themselves in some way, personally or professionally. And I don't think that at the moment, Korean society is structured in a way that allows them to do that. And so that is part of why I think K-Bridge is very uniquely positioned, especially for me, because I have kind of been forced to redefine myself of leaving the States, quitting my job, and then coming here and starting this project. That kind of sets a precedent that this is a type of community where that stuff is welcomed and encouraged to some extent, and that you will have a group around you kind of supporting you. Because Korea is very much it leans into the power of the group more than it leans into the power of the individual, I would say. If you don't have a group around you when you're making a decision like that, it feels probably like career and personal suicide to some extent if you try and do anything radical. Whereas in the US, you'll still get some looks and it will still be hard, but taking big risks is kind of something that's celebrated, just within American history in general. And so I think that is really what I am offering people. That, and there is a physical homelessness dynamic that a lot of people feel that are engaging in these types of events. And so maybe one very clear example is one of the individuals I spoke to. She was born and raised in Korea, and then I think it was when she was 23 or 24, spent 3 months in San Francisco, and she had long been interested in U.S. culture, but her taste of San Francisco life, the communities that existed there, the fact that you could talk to a stranger and then become business partners in the future or just have a friendship with them was incredible to her. And then she came back to Korea, and she started to try and have small talk with people, and she was just getting shut down. Right? And there was no real community dimension. Even at these professional networking events for Koreans, usually you have to tell kind of somebody, hey, this is where you guys can start, just having conversations and meeting one another. Somebody has to establish the rules of this is what this time is for, because people won't just do that automatically. And so I think that having this kind of more US-centric culture where that stuff is the norm, where it's, oh, this person's working on a cool project, this other person is working on a cool project related to what he's working on, you just make the connection automatically. These basic kind of practices is really, I think, the value that people are very interested in, because it's just not currently part of like Korean society. It's not the norm.
And you mentioned to me before that it's very hierarchical, and so like you wouldn't really talk to, or you're very deferential to people who are, and basically based on age,
Yes.
and so you're kind of making a much flatter structure for communities to talk to each other, regardless of age or profession or status within organizations. Like should be a huge unlock if you can get people to trust in the system that you're building.
I think so. I mean, and even for me personally, and the way in which we are, the world in which we're moving towards, I think it has never been more important to have conversations with people that are much younger than you, just because technology is developing so fast and information is changing in such dynamic ways. And at the same time, having conversations with people that are in their 40s and 50s who have had experiences that you simply haven't. There's just like a level of understanding and like wisdom that these older folks have, and to facilitate more intergenerational conversation, I think is such an important thing. And I do not think that a lot of dialogue is being had across generations right now. So yeah, it's something that's needed, I think, for Korea, and I hope that Cambridge can be a platform where that is welcomed and is kind of the norm.
I'm sure it will. Are you the sort of person that sets goals? Are goals important to you, or how do you like to think about progress?
That is a good question. I used to definitely be a goal setter. I would say, especially when I was in finance, it was like, by what time am I going to hit associate or VP? And like, what does the career trajectory look like, and how fast can I get there? And even when I was taking like the whole CFA program, that was a very clear and defined goal of, I need to get to the end of this, I think that the goal for me, the near-term goal for me that I've been thinking about, is over the next 12 months, can I get to a place where this is financially self-sustaining without sacrificing on the ethos of the community and the value that people feel like they're getting out of it. That is really the near-term goal of success for me, I think. Other than that, not too much. It's really just a one foot in front of the other. And I know, just based on the last few months, that opportunities will just naturally emerge that I could not predict. People from all over the world of Korean heritage have been reaching out to me, saying like, hey, we should host something in Vietnam because there's a Korean, Vietnamese community here, and you should come out and visit, and I'll show you around. I just met these a Korean German and a Korean French guy. Both were like 40 plus, and they actually tried to start something like Cambridge a couple years ago, but it was always a side project for them, and it just took too much time and energy. And so they basically said like, hey, we'll help you with as you need to find venues and with relationships and funding sources and all of that stuff. So I think the amount of experimentation and the ideas to execute on are going to be like an overwhelming number, and it will more so be, how do I stay focused so that I can continue to achieve that like end of 2025 goal.
Or what a great feeling to have. I remember someone saying once that product market fit is like when you feel it being pulled from you, the market's pulling stuff out of you, which kind of is what you're saying is getting to that. As we wind down, I would love and you're heading back to the States tomorrow, and so kind of the end of your first stint in Korea. Like what based on the whole year and the evolution of it for you and the transition and starting your own thing, like what, if you were to come back and listen to this conversation in 10 years time, like what advice would you like give kind of your future self based on what you felt this year?
Yeah, it's I would say, continue to act on those decisions that are just sitting in the back of your mind, and they will not go away, right? Because I think that if you don't act on them, then in the future they will become like demons in the back of your mind, just like asking you why you didn't do X, Y, or Z. I think that's really, really the big thing. And the other thing is just in terms of, and I don't know because this isn't yet successful, but the model that I've always been approaching is, how do I help this person that I'm interacting with? In terms of like what success is defined by for Cambridge. My hope for both like myself as an individual and for Cambridge as like a community is that people will say, oh, because I cross paths with Tyger, or because I was part of Cambridge, I became a better person, or I in some ways derived some value, or my life was changed or impacted in some positive way. If every single person that like kind of touches me or touches the ecosystem says that, then I think like success is in inevitability. And if that's not the case, then I need to be careful about the long-term sustainability of this. And so that's really how I've been treating things, is for every single individual that I come across, no matter if I agree or disagree with some of their viewpoints, and they're in all different stages of life, how can I make that impact on them? And I've taken that approach for the past couple of months, is just try and be helpful, deliver the value first. And then when I go and say, hey, I'm going to start monetizing, that they would be like, yeah, absolutely. You've already, given me way more than $150, $200 worth of value. That's kind of been where my mindset is at. And it has worked like magic. It's like you just do good things for people. And then other people kind of learn that same mindset, and it becomes its own flywheel for the community. So I hope that, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that type of mindset or that approach to life, that hasn't changed.
Yeah, profound advice. And it sounds like you're already getting there. Someone was thinking about moving from Korea. They didn't do it because of you, and you're having a bunch of other conversations along similar lines. It's been inspiring to watch you go through 2024, and I'm super excited for what you and Cambridge are up to next year. Thank you for going through it with us.
Thank you, Dom, for joining along this journey. It's been a fun ride, especially since you have been part of this from way before this idea was even incepted into my brain. So I appreciate you being so generous with your time and asking such thoughtful questions. I think 2025 should be a very fun year.
Yeah, let's do it.